You don't see them dying in the streets, and in most places, you don't see them dealing out in the open. But our investigation reveals that the city is in the worst drug crisis it's ever seen, no matter how you cut it.
Cut it, cut it, cut it.
It's been one major drug raid after another in recent weeks. Police and the feds busting up rings, allegedly selling everything from pills to crack and heroin, including the largest ever gang raid of 120 arrests. I went to the head of the New York DEA for answers.
Last year in New York, we seized over 1,000 kilos of heroin. That's basically 1/3 of all the heroin seized in the United States by DEA. So it shows you how much New York is ground zero.
Hunt showed me a small fraction of the heroin that's been confiscated and will be destroyed and burned once the cases are closed. A kilo goes for $50,000 to $70,000. Once it's cut and packaged, each little bag goes for $6 to $10. The profit is mind-boggling, in the millions.
The cartels have basically flooded the market, so heroin is cheaper now than it really has ever been, and it's potent.
Hunt tells me the majority of city heroin is smuggled across the porous Mexican border in everything, including stuffed animals, shoes, clothing, even candy, then driven to the city just like it's fruit or furniture.
Tractor trailers are the big way actually for the heroin to come up and the money to go back. A lot of them have been outfitted with hidden compartments, traps.
Once packaged at a heroin mill, the individual envelopes are stamped with brand names as a marketing tool, but there's no shortage of demand.
Probably about 80% of new heroin users started with prescription drugs. And that's Percocet, oxycodone, hydrocodone.
I also talked with Special Narcotics Prosecutor Bridget Brennan, who handles the biggest drug cases, like a recent $5 million bust in an Upper Manhattan drug mill located on a quiet residential street, a disturbing new trend.
I've never seen an epidemic like this. It cuts across every neighborhood, every demographic. It cuts across New York City everywhere, and then it spreads.
The city health department tells us that drug overdose deaths continue to rise, with young adults being the most affected. Now let's find out what our panel has to say about this. Joining me, Dr. Darren Porcher. He's a former NYPD lieutenant and former undercover narcotics officer. He's also a criminal justice professor and TV and radio commentator. Dr. Darren, thanks so much for
having me, Lisa.
We appreciate it. Also with us, you know him from his music and his performances and his tours, the one and only Graf. He's a hip-hop artist. His new album is Painkillers Reloaded. We're going to find out where that name comes from and all about that. He's currently on tour, and this summer he's going to be touring with Royce da 5'9". Thanks so much for being with us, Graf.
Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate it. Also with us is Dr. David Orrs. He's a general practitioner on the Lower East Side. He's also the founder and executive director of a tattoo removal program for ex-offenders and former gang members who are trying to get their tattoos removed so that they can get different jobs where, you know, it's not cool to have those on them. And he also has strong opinions about this drug epidemic. Dr. Orrs, thanks so much for being with us.
Pleasure to be here.
We appreciate it. Darren, I want to start with you on this. Why are we seeing so many drugs?
Traditionally, we had an inordinately high spike in people that were addicted to prescription drugs such as Percocet and oxycodone. This was something that was coming from medical practitioners, whereas you had people that stole, let's say, the prescription book, things to that effect. And so what they did was they wrote scripts out and they just gave them, they gave these oxycodones out to people arbitrarily. However, when we look at what the federal government is doing with the pharmaceutical industry, they're now hampering down, clamping down, and they're now causing these medical doctors to send these prescriptions electronically to the pharmacies as opposed to arbitrarily writing scripts. So what happened is now you had this abundant number of people that were addicted to these prescription medications, and they're finding it's far easier for them to obtain heroin, which is at a much lower cost, than to obtain the oxycodone and the Percocet.
All right. And then, Graf, what does that mean on the streets, you know, of what people are doing in terms of the hustle on the streets?
I think if there's more product, then it's definitely going to increase the hustle outside, you know what I mean? But sometimes you gotta ask yourself, why is there an increase in general? Like, are people, is it a stress thing? Like, what is it that people are, why is the drug in more demand?
Dr. David Orrs, these drugs, for people who've never taken an opioid, what do they do to you, and why do you think people want them so much?
They make you feel good. They make you feel calm, relaxed. You don't care about your problems. I mentioned before the show that when you're on morphine for pain, like a burn injury or some kind of traumatic injury, the people still feel the pain. They just don't care about it anymore. It's kind of fascinating. It disconnects. your worries and your concerns from your mind. So it's very soothing and relaxing. Now, if you are in constant state of pain, psychological pain all the time, you're going to be very attracted to morphine because it gives you a break that you don't get otherwise. If you're not in psychic pain constantly, then you wouldn't need to be taking morphine.
Graf, what about in terms of the music industry in general, just the amount of drugs that's out there? We're hearing about it a lot in lyrics, but is it that prevalent?
I can't lie. Hip hop definitely isn't drug induced. Like, it's not, and I can't say that it's causing kids to use drugs more, because that's like saying is life imitate art, art imitate life. I think the hip hop in general is a reflection of what happened in the community. People are already twisted. These young kids, I'm in the street, young kids are high, you know what I'm saying? They're twisted, but a lot of that comes from the fact they might be stressed, they might have other problems that we got to work on besides just the drug use. It's like, why are you taking it? Some of it is not just recreational use. Some people are really in mental pain and anguish and feel that they need that.
This is Street Soldiers. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. We're talking about the drug war and the drug epidemic. We'll be back with more right after this.
There's way more drugs on the street now than ever before.
Think so?
I don't think so. I know so.
I want to come to the point of the whole cultural issue of where we see drugs. Darren, but what about this?
There's way more drugs on the street now than ever before.
Think so?
I don't think so. I know so. When I we just look from the 70s to now, tremendous amounts of drugs that are coming into this.
Everything is increased now. Yeah, I feel what you're saying.
Just into this New York City metropolitan area, we have a lot of drugs coming into this. And a lot of times, a lot of us, we don't take responsibility for what these issues are. What do we do as a community? A lot of times, I don't know of a poppy field in the United States. These poppy fields come from places like Afghanistan, and now Colombia has gotten more into the refinement process. What are we going to do? It's a two-front solution. We need to eradicate the supply, first of all. We have the demand over here, but we need to eradicate these fields where poppies are grown in places like Afghanistan.
But let me stop you right there about you're talking about the supply. But how are you ever going to stop the supply if there's always a demand and a growing number of demand for it?
The demand can easily be, I shouldn't say easily, but it can be stemmed with education. Think in terms of what happened with the cigarette, the tobacco campaign. When I was a kid, everyone smoked.
Because they thought it was cool.
Exactly. However, what happened was the federal government stepped in and they sued these tobacco industries and they forced them to put these ad campaigns and showing these people that were smokers.
And didn't allow them to do ad campaigns at places where there were youth gatherings and concerts and that type of thing.
I think the same holds true, and it's necessary to educate this population here.
But Dr. David, what about that? Do you think getting rid of these supplies is the answer?
If there wasn't a demand, there wouldn't be a supply. I think people, he said a lot of drugs are coming in the city. I think they do it for money. That's why people deal drugs.
No, they're totally doing it for money. And you have
but people don't realize that. It's just for money. It's
a business.
If you can make $20,000 a day selling avocados, it'd be a huge avocado problem.
Right.
True, I feel
It's cash, pure cash. It's not about like trying to get people addicted, trying to ruin the society, trying to torture, shoot kids, and none of that. It's all about cash. And I gave this example before. If you have one person addicted to heroin, and you gave them, for example, this is hypothetical, heroin lollipops, which there is such a thing for cancer patients. Let's say you had a heroin addict and you brought him into this lobby here.
People are Googling right now, heroin lollipops.
Yeah, it's out there. And then you give him the heroin lollipop. Now, Darren and I discussed this, and I agree with everything he says, and I have a third prong unconnected to his, and his are equally important, and that is to reduce the demand by just giving people morphine. If someone's a morphine addict, you just simply give them morphine, and the goal is not to help them, not to make them better, and not to do anything good for them. The goal is very specific, and that is to stop them from using street drugs.
This is Street Soldiers. I'm your host, Lisa Evers. Coming up, 100 gang members, alleged gang members, were arrested. Part of their operation was drug dealing and drug sales. How long before those spots are taken by other people, or did this bust really put a dent in the drug trafficking and some of the public housing developments in the Bronx? We'll find out what our guests have to say about that and more on these treatment options that's coming up.
Man, we be working, spilling all out the frying pan. Too much lead on your diet plan. Run up on the plug, thinking you flying, then you gon' get more than a body slam. You gon' need more than a spot exam. Young shooter with the new chrome. Beat your ass until you two-tone. Take the number to the trapping. How you get the number to the new phone?
That's Trap Phone Ringin'. That's off Graf's new album, Painkillers Reloaded. Graf, Trap Phone Be Ringin'.
Right.
What was the whole inspiration behind that?
Well, that song is really just a feel-good record, to say the truth. And when I say trap, I'm talking about I like to try to generalize. I mean, specifically, yeah, trap phone ring, and you know, it's the trap. But when we say trap, however you get your money is when it's ringing. You could be a barber in the barber shop. You say I'm in the trap. Your phone ringing. You're making your income. It's
Hey,
about
Graf,
pressure.
let me ask you a question, right? I asked you, we talked earlier about the education. I understand that there's a certain component of music that people like to listen to, but do you think at one point as an artist you do take a level of responsibility for what people hear in connection with listening to this music? And I love hip-hop music, okay?
Right.
So I'm not taking a shot against hip-hop music, but at the same token, we get to a point where we glorify the lifestyle that we're trying to get away from. And I'm not telling you got to make records that need to be played in the church, but is it safe to say that you can possibly produce something that can be good music but doesn't affiliate itself with drug use, gun violence, and things to that effect?
I think me specifically as an artist, I have a well-balanced project that talks to every aspect and every facet of what we go through in the urban community. So it's like, it's not only the trap forming, and I got a record on my album talking about suicide. Like, I wrote it from a first person of a young girl who's contemplating suicide. At the end of the record, unfortunately, she does commit suicide because that is a reality.
I will say this much.
So
I don't like your music. I love your music, okay?
Real.
But at the same token, I'm an adult. But now also, let's rewind this. How about a kid that's maybe 16, 15 years old?
Right.
They listen to your music, and then they say, look, I'm going to get me some Oxy, some Percocets, and I'm going to roll on the block with my gun. I want to bust my gun. And I'm not saying that that's what your focus is,
Right.
but we just go back to the component.
But what about the
piece
kids?
that I
The
said
hook,
about
a hook is
education?
designed to be
Right.
catchy. What about what he's saying?
I would hope that
You know, for a
somebody-
kid, like the hook is very catchy.
Right. I would hope that he wouldn't hear that and run in the street and do that.
But you got to understand, the kids, they are going to hear this.
That would
Whether
be
you-
terrible. But then I would hope that he hears everything else and also hear when I speak to him.
Let's talk about what happened in the Bronx. This arrest, you have in a couple of public housing developments, 100 alleged gang members, a laundry list of crimes in the indictment, including the murder of a 92-year-old woman, murder of other murders that they are accused of being responsible for, all around this drug dealing, basically drug bazaar. Anything you want, they're going to get for you if they don't already have it. Is this going to change? Is this going to change anything for the people living there?
I think so. If you arrest 100 people from one particular area, that's creating a disruptive behavior in any community. It's going to make it safer, especially if you kill somebody that's 92 years old, you said. That's crazy. You know what I'm saying? So old people should, elderly could feel more safe in that environment. Yeah, I think that would affect that.
From a police perspective, it does put a dent in temporarily. However, there needs to be a sustainment piece in connection with this. We can't just go in and wipe out, let's say, 126 people and say, all right, we can sit back, we've done our job. It's something that has to be an ongoing process.
My truth is that I am a gay American.
A scandalous resignation that shocked the nation.
My God was powerful.
Now, years later, former New Jersey Governor Jim McGreevey opens up in an intimate, rare interview.
I had the chance to realign my life.
He details his journey to redemption and how he's helping others. A Fox.
But then when they're high
Now, you
on
can't-
4
you
heroin
can't- I disagree.
lollipops
You don't think
and
so?
they
I
walk
disagree. I
outside
think
onto
that-
the street and they're hanging out, it's going to look like a zombie zone.
And I gave you the example of the cigarette campaign.
Listen, the idea is to take the customer.
People do, but it's
Hold on, we're going to talk. Hold on one second. We're going to
The
talk about
idea
demand.
of this center is to take the customer away from the street dealer.
Okay.
Period. Has no other function whatsoever.
Period.
Just take the customer away from them.
Okay.
Once we have the customer in our place, then we can decide how to handle that customer. As weeks and months go by, you'll get some that want to get rehab. You'll get some who want to stay high.
Right.
One is psychotic.
Drop
one is
out.
No, one's uneducated. One has brain damage from the war. They get it in the head. Post-traumatic stress people. Like I told you, it'd be a big variety,
Right.
pack of people, and you can treat them because now you have them.
Right.
You didn't have them before. They're out
Right.
wandering around on their own, loose, taking drugs in the street, which are fentanyl, poison.
And some attacking people, which we've
They're
seen.
doing violence and crime. Listen, right now, this is your failure going on now. The addicts do crime. They do violence. They do prostitution, human trafficking. You're giving an enormous amount of money to very bad people. They use that money to billions and billions of dollars to fund wars all over the world. Now, so American drug addicts are funding war all over the world, buying weapons and guns. All the wars are funded by heroin. Oh, it's called narco dollars.
But you got to remember, them drugs are getting here. The drugs that are in the community, they're not created by the community. They're getting here.
Right, just
you wanna
shipped
say
in.
Government, whatever. They're getting here another kind of way. That's a whole nother.
That's a whole. That's a whole. That's a
We
whole.
don't put the
That's
drugs
really a
here.
documentary because of,
Right.
of
No,
how they come in.
The
But let
drugs
me-
are shipped in, but the point is that all this,
They're smuggled in.
if there was no money in it, nobody would do it.
Exactly. But let me ask you this. Okay, let's come back to the demand
It
piece.
should be a medical problem, it should be a medical problem, not a criminal problem.
Okay, but everyone agrees. I think even in the law enforcement community too. There's the enforcement aspect. There's the crime aspect.
And you would still have that for people who don't use the centers.
But if you don't deal with the demand issue, that law enforcement says you can't solve this problem with you
I
can't
just dealt
arrest
with
your
it.
way.
There's no more demand. If
Right.
I give a person, I'm not sure about 15-year-olds at EDM concerts, but a 25, 30-year-old addict.
Like an addict.
If I give them morphine, and I know thousands of these people, for free, and other things they want, they will go do that.
So we should just give drugs out for free.
No, because you save it. You're not giving. What you're doing is stopping them getting shot, stabbed, and doing crime. You have to you can't let this
I
continue.
disagree.
Darren, what about that?
I totally disagree. I understand, and I think that you have great intentions here, and it may work in some settings. However, overall, when we talk the issuance of drugs to younger kids, a lot of these kids are as young as 8, 9 years old, and giving them a lollipop for morphine, I'm just really against that. Now, keep in mind,
minors can be a separate
you're the medical
conversation.
professional, and I'm the legal expert. I should say the law enforcement expert.
we give 8-year-olds insulin.
But at the same token,
Yeah, but they're not getting high from that.
I
And
don't buy
chemotherapy
in.
for cancer.
I don't buy into this.
We give kids drugs all the time.
Okay, but let me ask you this: in terms of the demand issue, because you're talking about this approach with the heroin or the
It's
morphine
done in
lollipops.
Portugal. Portugal has the whole country now like this. They have centers that give out morphine, and they've had a 30, 40, 50% in crime in the first year.
Really?
Because let me ask you
Okay,
this:
that's
what is your take on just the education of these people from K through 12?
I'm saying that's a separate thing.
How about-
I'm
But
saying
let's talk
the
about the demand. Let's talk about the
the
education.
education is critically important,
I
but
just think
separate.
that it should be mandatory blocks, like how we have math, science.
Yes, please.
We should have a
I have
block.
that. I
for drug
agree. I
control
agree. I
strategies.
agree. I
And
agree.
think that
But
this
what
should
about-
start
but you're
in
still
earlier
gonna-
Okay,
years.
but what about the education piece?
I
Because-
agree, but you're still going to have addicts.
Okay.
Addiction has to do with thirst, hunger, and
But what about the next generation that's coming up? These kids that are 8, 9, 10 years
it's
old.
fantastic because a lot of the people who sell drugs are drug addicts themselves. When you take these people off the
You
street,
have a large component of these people that are drug addicts. I'll agree
so
with
if you
that.
take the drug, if you take the customers away from the street into these centers by hook or by crook, we'll discuss for hours how to do that. But
Right.
let's say you could do it.
Right.
Then they're not in the street selling drugs. That's an army of
I know what he's saying. In
salespeople.
theory, what he's saying is I don't know how to apply that, but in theory, I get what you're saying.
Okay, but Graf, what about a public awareness campaign? What about a thing where, there's a lot of people, a lot of kids, they look upon regular cigarette
like having a
smoking
public
as
awareness
harmful
campaign
now,
of
the
thirst.
new generation coming up of children.
They kind of do,
What
but they
about,
kind of don't. I mean, I see the commercials for it too, and I would hope it helps.
It
I
worked
don't-
with tobacco use. It did. I think it did a really
A lot
good
of
job
people
in terms
don't
of the
smoke
reduction.
tobacco,
Now,
so-
granted,
You don't agree
we
with
didn't
that?
cure
People are
tobacco
still
use.
It's still-
However,
it's still
it's
the-
something
it's
that
still
did
the-
work.
but a lot of them are
It's
smoking
still-
weed and think
that's
that's
still
okay.
the number one killer.
No, but I'll tell you
Cigarettes?
what, though. Education
I'll tell you a
will
great
always work.
cigarette.
Cigarettes and alcohol, I agree.
I'll tell you 2 things that work. Education will definitely work in some senses. I don't think it won't take away
I
the
agree with
demand, but it will
education,
educate
too.
people so they'll understand. And another thing too, if you could create education where you teach them how to learn and to get into the better job situations where maybe in that particular job they get a good paycheck, but then you have to get blood tested, then they might be like, well, I'm not going to do this because I want to keep my job and I make good money here, so let me do this. And that could be attached to education too. Like if you combine that with good job.
Yeah, but the education.
Well, the education
Dr.
is
Dale,
just.
Dr.
I'm,
Dale, what about
I'm
that?
completely for education. I agree. But some will get through that net.
Right.
You'll still have one drug
Yeah,
user.
you-
Well,
The
what
demand ain't going
effect would this have
nowhere. The
had?
demand is
What
not
effect
going
would this have
anywhere.
had? For example, we've had an ongoing problem with K2 users on 125th Street.
You're
around
talking
Park
about
Avenue.
having advertising to get rid of poverty. It just doesn't work. You can't advertise
That's what I'm
poverty
saying.
away.
You got to attack. You know
You
what
can't
it is?
go, I'm going to put a poster up and say, hey, people, don't be poor anymore. That's not going to happen. It's not going to make them not poor
What we
anymore.
doing?
No, but if you have people
point
that-
you just
that-
made?
Same with addicts. You can't make them go away with advertising.
Graf, final thought.
I think it still comes down to how kids actually feel. If you're talking about young kids, recreational use, it's about connecting with them and talking to the kids. That's it, how they really feel, what they really want.
That's more about education.
That's it. And that part of it is education. But I know a lot of small. My man is like a borderline genius. He's still popping pills and sipping lean. He just wants to feel differently. He wants to feel different than what he feels right now. It's just you got to connect with people and figure out what the issues are. Whether it's financial, and sometimes it's not even always financial. Some kids got money and they still want to feel
Right, and it
how
could
they
be
want to feel when they high.
exactly
So it's just-
different types of stresses.
You got to connect with them on a mental level. It's just not surface.
Agree,
All right,
agree 100%.
Okay, I want
Right, hit the
all right,
tree.
good, agree 100%. I want to thank all of you for being with us for this episode of Street Soldiers. Dr. Darren Porcher, Graf, Dr. David Orrs. Remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I hope it's your only weapon. Let's push for peace.